Okay, so we've got people joining us already. I see the participant numbers growing by the second. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks to all of you for joining with us today. Happy Earth Day first to everybody out there. We're living in a moment where there's a lot of optimism about the potential for how we can start making even more meaningful contributions to how we address issues of climate, biodiversity, conservation broadly, and sustainability in our communities in an equitable, thoughtful, and inclusive way. And today's Earth Day, starting with our discussion moderated by Dean Robbins earlier today, really set us on that path to, again, really start to think about not only solutions, but equitable solutions to the challenges that we face. So we're excited to be with you this afternoon. My name is Nathan Schulfer. I am the Director of International and Professional Masters of Science programs at the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. For those of you that had a chance to listen to the videos that we produced just before this, before joining us here today, you'll remember that one of the things that I said in that video was I'm excited by nature-based solutions because I think they complement and strengthen lots of the efforts that have already been put forth around conservation and sustainability globally. And here we are, right? As we continue to learn more, we recognize the power of these kinds of solutions to help us problem solve around a big wide range of the challenges we face here in Wisconsin, in our own communities, but of course around the country and around the world as well. So we're going to start by doing some brief introductions, and we're going to start with Karen Sands, who's joining us today from the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewer District. So Karen, a brief introduction, and thanks for joining us today.
Sure, I'm honored to be included, and I'm actually joining you from my spare bedroom at my home, right? But on behalf of the MMSD, yeah, my name is Karen Sands. I'm the Director of Planning, so long-range thinking, research, like making sure we consider the future, and sustainability, making sure we get it right. I have 24 people in my group. I could use 48 or, double that even. But we make do with what we have, and I have very talented staff. So I'm fortunate to work with the staff that I have. They inspire me each and every day. And not sure what else to say except thank you for inviting me.
I think that's great. We also have Nathan Henry with us today, joining us from Portland, Oregon. So Nathan, a brief introduction, and thanks for participating in our panel today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Nathan. My name is Nathan Henry. I'm the U.S. project manager for the U.S. Nature for Climate program. And so what our organization is focused on, we're a coalition of I think, 9 different organizations that are really focused on elevating the role that natural climate solutions can play in overall efforts to mitigate climate change in the United States. And so just in case you're not familiar with the term, natural climate solutions are conservation, restoration, and improved land management strategies that help remove carbon from the atmosphere while also helping to keep our air and water clean or healthy, soil, and productive. And these solutions are important because they're practical, they're relatively inexpensive, and they also provide numerous economic benefits to landowners and communities as well, and can be implemented widely on a large variety of different kinds of lands. So yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel, and yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan. So as you can see in our chat, Andy is helping us with questions. We've got a great group of people here, 33 attendees. So please do use the Q&A function and the chat function for questions that you have. we're here to answer them, and we're excited to use the questions you have to drive our conversation forward. So don't be shy. If you are shy, then we've got a series of questions we'll go to. But it's fun to get the crowd involved in these events, and it pushes us in directions that we wouldn't have imagined as we were preparing for the event. So please feel free to plug questions into the chat. We hope you do, as many as you'd like. I thought I might just start with a question until some begin to come in that might set the stage a bit. So there is a lot of optimism at the moment here in the United States around a renewed commitment to addressing the climate crisis from multiple perspectives, nature-based solutions being one of them. Today, there's a major summit at the White House that's addressing some of these issues. Karen and Nathan, from both of your perspectives, what would be the first steps we would take at this point in driving some of these policies or ideas forward? What are some of the more successful, easier to attain, maybe lower hanging fruit opportunities in your specific spaces that you think that the US is poised to be able to take advantage of? Whether big or small, local, regional, anything come to mind? Either one of you, please feel free to add.
Well, I guess I could jump in. I mean, I think one of the advantages we see we always call them natural climate solutions in general, are that they sort of are the low hanging fruit in the sense that, you know, there doesn't need to be new technology invented to put these practices in place. We kind of already know what we need to do. And in fact, there are in many cases already sort of an infrastructure in place to help kind of finance and incentivize these programs. So you have, you know, carbon offset markets, for example, which are one mechanism. You have numerous programs in the Farm Bill, which incentivize conservation land management practices, which can be, you know, frankly expanded and perhaps reprioritized a little bit to increase kind of the kind of value placed on carbon mitigation as a conservation outcome. So I think that's why these solutions are important. I mean, listen, we have to do things to decarbonize the energy sector, transportation sector. These are all important things, but they're not things that we can flick a switch on and do tomorrow. And so one of the, I think, things that's appealing about natural climate solutions are there are things that can be kind of started now to get the ball rolling as we're doing the broader societal changes we need to do to really tackle climate change.
And I will just totally agree with what Nathan said. So yes, we can't flick a switch on climate change. We can't. We wish we could, right? If we could, we would. Wouldn't we? I'm pretty sure we would.
Oops, Karen, I think you're muted.
Yep, Karen, you went muted again.
Ah,
there you go.
Sorry, thank you. I am totally agreeing with Nathan. I don't think we can like flip a switch on anything, right? Why would we, right? Climate change is a very, very important topic. It's not something that's a yes or no. It's a not today or tomorrow thing. It's an everyday thing. So we can't flick a switch, and we know that, but we know we can do small things. And I know that small things don't add up in the math to a lot, but we all need to do that, right? That's how we raise awareness. And it's really important to do that. So I would say that Nathan made some really great points. And it's really important that we try to do what we can. We have to realize we can't do everything, but we have to do something. And if we don't do something, you can't really sleep at night, right? I can't. I don't know about you, but I can't.
Yeah, I agree with all of those points. Yeah, Nathan, I agree with you as well, right? These are the low-hanging fruit. That's a great way of thinking about it and framing it. We know what can happen. Karen, your work in Milwaukee has shown the results. You see results of decisions that get made about using nature to help us address these challenges. We've got a question. Our first question, thank you, Murray. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name correct. And it's a really good question. How much of an impact can nature-based solutions have when it comes to combating climate change? Is it significant enough to get the ball rolling, as Nathan mentioned, or are more drastic changes in energy use also necessary in conjunction with nature-based solutions? Really good question. I've got ideas. I want to hand it off to Nathan or Karen first to see if there's an initial response that either of you have. And if we need to repeat the question and someone can't see it, just let me know and I'll repeat parts of the question.
I would say that I think the premise of the question is exactly right, in the sense that, natural climate solutions alone, I mean, we would be the last people to suggest that alone will get us kind of to where we need to go in terms of, addressing the climate change issue. They certainly cannot be done instead of efforts to decarbonize energy and transportation sectors. It's a complement. It's something that should be done in addition to those strategies. I guess I'm of the opinion personally, and I think organizationally as well, that we're sort of in an all of the above sort of situation where we have to walk and chew gum at the same time, so to speak. We have to do a lot of things at the same time, some of which are going to take a lot of time and kind of require a lot of initiative to do. In terms of the potential impact of natural climate solutions, there's been a number of studies done the last few years, one done by Bronson Griscom, another one by Joe Fargione, which focused just on the United States, which basically showed that natural climate solutions can, if implemented to their fullest extent, contribute up to, I think it's 30% of the carbon mitigation necessary to sort of keep the global temperature from rising. I think it's 1.5 degrees Celsius. So, but that being said, these are solutions that need to be done at scale. We're talking about, planting large number of trees in ecologically appropriate places. We're talking, getting a large number of farmers to implement regenerative agricultural practices that improve soil health and sequester carbon. This is definitely things that need to be done at a large scale in order for them to have kind of the intended effect. But, broadly speaking, I would say it's, we need to do kind of all of these things at the same time, not, kind of pick and choose between different strategies.
Hey, I mean, what Nathan said, you can decide not to do something because you feel it's a drop in the bucket, but your drop in the bucket might make a big difference. I mean, like, come on, like everybody needs to do something and businesses need to do more. And like, it all adds up. And so I work in stormwater infrastructure and planning and like bigger things, but stuff that gets into our sewer system. But I really feel like we need to keep every drop of water out of our sewer system in Milwaukee. And that's where I come from. Like, you know what? One rain girl doesn't do a kill of beans, but if we have 20,000, which we have more than that, they do something, like, so we need to think about the very small building blocks. And people might not feel they're doing anything, but they have, if they participate, they are doing something if it gathers momentum, right? So, but what Nathan said, we'll just go back there.
I agree with your analogy of building blocks, right? And it steps back both to your video and I think to the spirit again of the question that was asked. And as Nathan reflected on too, right? It is an all hands on deck approach, and that includes individuals at local levels. A rain barrel in the backyard. You're right, it's cumulative effects. I think that speaks to the behavioral aspect of how we make these changes as well, right? And so we do have to reduce emissions. There's no way to meet the goals that we've got without finding ways to reduce emissions as well. Great question. We've got another question here directed specifically to you, Karen, from Ron. And the question is, please describe the MMSD Green Seams program, its goals, some of the partnerships, and the current status of the program. So for other folks listening, again, a program rooted in an urban space designed to address a range of environmental issues, I'm presuming.
So that's a great question. And that program started under my umbrella and is not currently under my umbrella now. So I'm going to do the best I can, and then invite the person who's asking to email me at ksands@mmsd.com if I don't answer their question, because I will forward it on and make sure I get the question answered. But so the initial Green Seams goal was numeric, and it was to get 10,000 acres of land under control in Green Seams properties. And Green Seams properties had to meet 3 criteria, and they were, I think, 24 acres or greater, having hydric soils, like meaning like a certain soil type that would hold water. I'm sorry, I'm so rusty on this because it was like 30 years ago for me. But anyway, the important thing was to make sure that we could not allow land to develop that should not be developed. And so my background, I'm trained as an urban planner. The urban planner in me like really embraced this. I was like, oh yeah, no, right. Sometimes urban cannot be planned there. And those criterion really met the standards. We had the foresight of a very strong commission and a very strong executive director in Kevin Schaefer to make sure that these lands would not be developed. And that was pretty much, embraced as policy and practice. So the current status is that, roughly speaking, we're about halfway to our goal. Our goal was by 2035 to have this 10,000 acres. I feel like we're on a path to make sure that it happens. And we've also expanded the program to include agricultural land. So we have a working soils program that is heavily funded by USDA to make sure that we are able to protect farmland soils, particularly those that are near urban waterways, so that runoff from these farm fields don't pollute riverways, particularly the Milwaukee River. And that's where we're most active. The Milwaukee River watershed is where we're most active in this. Karen Manalo set this program up, and now Kristen Schulteis, who's a soil scientist who works with me, is making sure this program goes forward. And it's very, very exciting to see it unfolding. And it so expands what we do at MMSD, right? I mean, we're all about sewage, but we're about a lot more. Let me just say that.
Thank you. And Ron is mentioned. If you want more information, I think you can share your email, or you got Karen's email when she just mentioned it. Okay, now we've got questions rolling in, all sorts of great questions. Nathan, we're going to shift this question back to you. It's from Jane Elder. It's a question about if Nature for Climate has any public opinion research that you've used for how to talk about natural climate solutions. And they're working on a project to promote conservation and restoration of land-based carbon sinks, and the language around it is difficult. This actually ties into the next question as well. So Nathan, maybe you can think about this, and Karen as well, which is, it seems logical that restoring floodplains, removing concrete from riverbeds is theoretically makes sense. But what kinds of objective measures do you use to convince skeptics that these policies pay off in the long run? So there's a little bit of synergy between those questions, right? How are you communicating it? And what are the things that you found, Nathan, and then Karen as well, that really help those who, again, may be skeptical to some extent about the values of nature-based solutions?
Well, one thing I guess I want to make clear about U.S. Nature for Climate is, I mean, we're a relatively small program. I mean, I'm the only full-time staffer. And while we do have a coalition of 10 other organizations, there's only so much we can do to kind of move public opinion on this. And so that's why our effort, I kind of look at it as opposed to trying to convince kind of the broader American public that these are, solutions that we should pursue. We're really kind of focused on kind of decision makers and the organizations, whether they're environmental and natural organizations or stakeholders in the agricultural and forestry industry, trying to, I guess you could say, educate them and I mean, give them sort of the message guidance that they need to effectively communicate with our audience on the issue. And so there certainly has been kind of research done kind of larger scale that has really kind of helped guide the way we talk about these issues. We've also done some, I guess you can call it sort of elite research, where you talk to some of these kind of key stakeholders, in these various sectors that I talked to, and kind of just, we're not really trying to understand, figure out the perfect message for getting those people on board. We're trying to just understand kind of where they are on the issue. Do they understand what natural climate solutions are? What are the challenges and opportunities that they see in implementing these solutions? And that really helps us then kind of tailor our messaging and our efforts towards those areas that are going to be kind of most effective. And so, when we did this research last year, one of the things that we found is most people do that we're trying to communicate with sort of do understand what natural climate solutions are. So we don't really have to spend a lot of our time kind of educating people on the basic vocabulary. What there really was kind of a need to prove, in one sense, the kind of the business case for doing this. Like, how do we convince, a landowner to want to do these practices that mitigate carbon, but also, and I think has been proven in a lot of research to show, have economic benefits as well, both for the landowners themselves, but also for surrounding communities. So a lot of the research we're doing is kind of that kind of research too, like marshaling the facts and kind of being able to make this effective argument that persuades sort of our grass tops audience, I guess you could say, to support these solutions.
Sorry, I muted myself. Karen, anything you want to add just about in your context? And I imagine working with many different jurisdictions in Milwaukee, in particular about that question of getting folks who might be skeptical on board with these kinds of solutions. Oop, now you're muted, Karen. This is the universal nature of being on Zoom. We're muted, we're unmuted.
You'd think I would learn how to do this after a year, but apparently I can't. And I don't know. But so that's a really good question. I feel like, mostly when I talk to people around here, no one has ever taken me up on climate change in the past year. And, maybe I'm lucky. I don't know. But I feel like everyone takes it now as a given here. Like, we just talk about it, like it's normal. I remember I put out a sustainability plan 8 years ago. Someone emailed me and said, I can't believe you talked about climate change in that. And I said, why wouldn't I? There's science, right? And they said, well, you're going to get slammed. And no one slammed me. And now I just talk about it like it's normal. And it is normal in Milwaukee. I think people understand science, at least in the context of climate change here. I could be naive. I don't know. But, or maybe they're just being kind to me. That's good. Like they feel sorry for me. That's fine. Like I'll just take it. But,
well, we are making progress, it seems to me, right? And that, you
yeah,
know,
that's what I
happening.
feel like. Yes. So I'm sorry, I didn't express that very well, but yes, I think so. Like people do get like, oh, things are all different. And then they remember the childhood if they're from here. And you're like, oh yeah, I used to go to the lake shore or something and it was different then and now it's this way. And they get it, you know.
Well, and one thing I would point out, there's a survey that's done by a college in Colorado every year. It's called the Conservation in the West Survey. And they've done it for like the last 10 or 11 years. And the really good thing, as a former pollster, the really good thing about that is you have kind of a benchmark of data from 10 years ago, and you can see how opinions changing over time. And I think one of the things, if you can go to their website, it's publicly available information. You know, you can really see that there really has been and kind of a significant and, you know, increasing level of concern about climate change generally, but also kind of support for you know, taking action to address climate change is also increasing, and that includes in some pretty conservative Western states like Wyoming and Dakota, where you might have differences in degree, but you still see the same trend in the information. So I think that's very encouraging.
Nathan, that's really helpful to me. Also, I was at a party more than a year ago, like back when there were parties, but someone had moved here and they said they were a climate refugee, and I was like, wait, what's that? And it was a real thing. And now I'll you know, I look about it and I can see it's there are all kinds of talks about like, hey, maybe we should prepare. And this person who told me at a party more than a year ago that they had moved here because they're afraid of forest fires and not having access to water, you know, that's become a real thing.
Yeah, but
So that's something we should think about, right?
It seems to me, you know, sort of wrapping up this question as we head into some other ones, it's increasingly the case that people are impacted by climate change, whether even if it's not directly, it's indirectly. You meet somebody new. You know, we all lived through the California wildfires last year, you know, even when we weren't there because it was such a catastrophic event. So it's always going to be difficult, right? Again, depending upon where you're at, because there will be pockets of resistance politically to the issues we talk about. But I think it is becoming increasingly the case that we do see how these things impact folks. And there's some of these old sayings, right? Like you have to see it to believe it. Well, in this case, right, where we live here in Wisconsin, we all know that there's increased amounts of flooding happening with some semi-regularity in different places, in particular in the southern part of the state. So we see these things, people want solutions. You're right, it's always the prerogative, it's the space we exist in that we do need to, in some instances, convince people of that. But yeah, slowly but surely the tide is changing and more people are at least listening, right? And that's the first step to having a productive conversation. Okay, so we're going to come back to Morel's question in a second. We've got a question here from Ned. Ned, apologies that I didn't see this quicker. And here we are. We already only have 15 minutes left in this session. So how quickly 45 minutes of time goes by. Here's the question. The US needs a mechanism to speed up the transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to one based on renewable energy. We would all agree with that. Cap and trade was one of these options that would help us transition, but it went down 11 years ago. Carbon fees and dividends is the best mechanism. It's good for people, good for the economy, creates good paying jobs, and has worked well in Canada and Sweden. The question is, do we agree with that? Or do we think that there's another way of hastening this transition from fossil fuels to one based on renewable energy? I certainly can claim no expertise about the economics of that piece and how that transition happens. Um, but it is also my sense that cap and trade has and continues to be held up as a very good option for creating some of the incentives necessary to make this transition. Karen and Nathan, do either of you have anything to add to that in specific?
Yeah, I have a few things that I mean, one thing I would say is there are actually a few functioning cap and trade markets in the United States. In California, there's actually a compliance market where actually corporations are actually required to purchase carbon credits. Whereas, and then on the East Coast, you have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is more of a voluntary carbon offset market. I can't claim to be an expert in carbon offset markets and how they work. But in terms of how they touch upon kind of my area of expertise, natural climate solutions, I mean, one of the things about the California market is, there is an allowance for kind of carbon offset projects within their cap and trade system. So you can, it's a small percentage, but of your carbon emissions you can offset through natural climate solutions focused projects. And then, I know in California, some of the revenue from the sale of these carbon credits is also dedicated toward environmental restoration activities, which again provides additional ways of funding the kind of the conservation practices we need to do to more effectively sequester carbon. And so I know that the California, the Nature Conservancy in California just put out a report, I think it was last year, where they really go into depth on the land management taking in California. And it's to say that one of the ways they're able to finance these activities is through their cap and trade mechanisms. So I don't know if that's completely answering your question, but again, in terms of thinking about how it touches, kind of the world of natural climate solutions, I think that's encouraging. And personally speaking, I wouldn't mind if other states and even nationally, we kind of took that approach. We tried to do it in Oregon a couple of times in the last few years, and it died a spectacular death at the hands of legislative chicanery. But so yes.
Karen, anything you want to add to that?
Not much. Thank you for that. Cap and trade is great, but I don't have anything to add to it politically where I work. We try to stay out of politics. So
there, yeah, understood.
Okay.
There is a body of people out that share some criticisms of cap and trade, right? Saying, what really needs to happen is just slowing down or reducing emissions, and offsets and these types of schemes perhaps mirage the challenge, but maybe don't solve it. I personally step back to something, Nathan, you mentioned earlier on, which is an all hands on approach. And, the backside to that, in some of the places that we do work through the Nelson Institute around the world, people do view these schemes as providing the sort of regular annual long-term funding that is required to make some of the changes on the ground within communities to support them as well. So there are real values that come from schemes that provide long-term funding for a whole big wide range of conservation schemes. So as with everything in our sector, many different ways to think about it, and many different really thoughtful and intelligent people asking critical questions on those issues. We are going to get to your question here in just 1 second, Morel. Thank you for that. And Peggy, I just want to acknowledge your comment here in the chat, being in New York City and daffodils and tulips and cherries and magnolias blossoming, right? It's just a couple of weeks ago, the headline in the paper was the Japanese cherry blossoms. It's the earliest they've blossomed since like the year 1200 years ago. So we're seeing all of these phenological changes happening all around us. Again, I think it's some of those subtle things that happen in our backyard that take even folks who might be skeptical of some of these things, and at bare minimum, it allows them to see change, right? And change in seasonality when these things happen. People know their landscapes very well. Okay, we're going to step back to a question here for you, Nathan Henry. What are the steps that need to be taken to implement nature-based solutions on a large scale? I can imagine it takes lots of cooperation between diverse groups, such as state wildlife agencies, farmers, private property owners, local governments, etc. How can individuals help U.S. Nature for Climate reach the goal on a large scale?
Well, I think that really hits upon, I think, the challenges, but also the promise of natural climate solutions. It really does require broad cooperation across a lot of different sectors, from government agencies to private landowners, to kind of the stakeholders representing various industries, especially kind of the forest and agriculture industry. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why kind of our coalition is shaped the way it is, because we've tried to kind of bring in groups from all of those kind of different areas to, to basically coordinate our thinking on the topic and kind of develop effective strategies for getting this stuff done. I think that also, I think it's a very important point that, this needs to be done at a very broad scale. And, in terms of kind of financing for these endeavors, carbon offsets are certainly one avenue for doing that. Again, there are numerous kind of conservation programs that the federal government and many state governments already fund that can be expanded, but also a lot of these programs, support conservation activities for a number of different reasons, like water quality improvement or protecting topsoil, don't necessarily kind of emphasize carbon sequestration as kind of one of the key outcomes that they're looking for. So, kind of putting that into the mix as an outcome, and then providing the financing to kind of support that is important as well. In terms of kind of what an individual person can do, I mean, I think just kind of, again, we're trying to influence policymakers to make decisions. I think just kind of educating yourself on the issue and I mean, obviously there are things that an individual can do, like planting a tree in your backyard, which, especially if you live in an urban area, is not only beneficial for carbon and for just having a nice tree in your yard, but also, has effects on kind of urban heat island effects and can actually lower energy costs. And actually, one of the things that some of our partners have been really studying are, kind of the effect of urban forestry programs and how tree cover in a lot of communities, especially low income and kind of minority communities, is vastly unequal with tree cover in higher income communities, for example. And so, promoting efforts to kind of reforest urban communities is something that I think individuals can become involved in as well, that not only has benefits for carbon and for economies, but also for kind of equity and environmental justice as well. So I would recommend, looking into programs like that.
Yeah, and that really speaks, Karen, to your work. And it was the part about your presentation that I was just endlessly reminded of is how we can bring this down to an individual level. And you're right, psychologically, sometimes it might mess with us a little bit. What are we contributing? But it does matter. Every step matters. And I presume you see that a lot in Milwaukee.
Thank you, Nathan. Yes, I see it a lot. Like, there's a eureka moment, and it's hard to capture that, like, because it's like one starfish at a time, like, how do we, like, but we know it's important. So I really loved what Nathan had to say. But I would also add, not but, and I would also add that everyone can do something, right? And that's where you just brought me back to. Like, I feel like we can't make perfect the enemy of the good, right? We have to make good enough, and that's where we are. That's where we are in Milwaukee, anyway. I am so proud of where we are and what we have done here. It's not perfect, We can talk about cap and trade. Someone mentioned that. I wrote that down, and I was like, I don't want to address that because cap and trade is a political issue. I'm more emboldened to talk about socioeconomic issues. I'm not good with political issues, so whatever. But I think cap and trade has a place. We all have solutions. Solutions are fleeting, but if we can capture the hearts and minds and spirits of people, that will spur a lot. So that's all.
And I think it is important, right, to acknowledge the distinctions between what are sort of political level actions and community level actions.
Right.
Something we spend time thinking about within the Institute in the spaces that I operate in is this acknowledgement that the environment has been politicized, but that doesn't mean that we can't extract the pieces out of that still have impacts on the ground. So Morel, it's a great question. And we can acknowledge and see that these big collective actions are required for us to meet very, very ambitious national level, state level kinds of goals that countries are developing. Again, today, they think to the summit that just happened at the White House today. This was a lot of countries making very ambitious goals, setting very ambitious goals. It can be, again, hard to conceptualize that. But we really do have powers as individuals in this space to have an impact. Okay, well, we've got 4 minutes left. We've got no questions left in our Q&A and in our chat. So I just want to throw out this one last chance. If there's one more question from any of the attendees who's joining us, now is your time to ask it of us here as we get ready to sign off at 3:45. Any last questions from anyone participating with us today? These were great questions. I think they drove the conversation in a really unique way that helps all of us, again, be remembered that there's scales at which we can, contribute and which or where decisions, or I should say solutions, are found. We have to work between those scales to achieve the goals that we've got. Any questions from anyone? Karen,
Yeah.
so go ahead.
Nathan, I'm going off script here.
Please do.
Sorry. I really like Nathan Henry from U.S. Nature for Climate. I want to ask him, can we talk later? I'd like to figure out how to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure, Nathan can share our contact information.
Okay.
I think one of the points I would make, is it fair to say, Karen, that you're sort of more focused on the resilience side of things, where I'm probably a little bit more focused on the mitigation, climate change mitigation side of things?
So putting any theme from this conference aside, we at MMSD are focused on keeping water out of our sanitary system, that water being stormwater. So I'm very focused on green infrastructure and other things away from our pipes that keep water where it falls.
Well, and I think one of the things that, you mentioned kind of agricultural strategies and kind of soil health as kind of one of the things that can help achieve that goal. And I think one of the things I would say is that, kind of mitigation and kind of efforts to, mitigate the impacts of climate change, it would include flooding, for example, go hand in hand, because when you look at strategies that you do on land to improve soil health, like planting cover crops, for example, those have carbon benefits in terms of removing atmospheric carbon from the atmosphere, but they also help mitigate flooding and make farmland more resilient to drought and more of an issue out here in the West, and flooding as well. So in a lot of cases, the things that you do to prevent things like flooding are also things that you do to mitigate carbon, which frankly, I think makes this a much easier sell to, say, policymakers and others who are trying to navigate this puzzle and what to do.
Yeah.
Well, here we are, everybody, at 3:45. That was the fastest 45 minutes that I've experienced in quite a while, I will say. So I want to once again thank Karen for your willingness to join us,
Sure.
Nathan for your willingness to join us, Colleen and Andy, thanks for your help and support on this panel. Thanks to all of you in attendance, and hopefully the discussion was productive for you as well. So best wishes to everyone for a happy remainder of your Earth Day. Let's remind ourselves as we move forward after this conversation that there's loads of solutions that we can do right in our own backyards. All of those contribute to the bigger, larger goals that we have as a nation, as a world, as communities. To make the world a better place, to keep the water safe, clean, healthy. Large-scale decision-making is made by politicians. I'm surprised that the panelists want to suggest small-scale mitigation measures rather than speeding up. It's a great question, Ned. We could probably speak for hours about that question. And I don't necessarily know if it's saying that we don't acknowledge big solutions are needed, but that big solutions sometimes can feel out of reach of folks, right? And some of it is about inspiring ideas and decisions on the ground.
Well, and I would say one thing, I would say that natural climate solutions is a big solution. I think when you look at the cumulative impact of doing these land management practices at scale, like I said, there's research out there that says this can be up to 30% of the carbon mitigation we need to achieve our climate goals. So you know, it may seem like small on the ground, but it is a cumulative effect, and you need to do it kind of at scale, and it can have a really significant and important impact if you do. Sorry to jump in there.
No, that's okay. Karen, any last comments before we sign off?
Just one question. So Nathan S, because there are two Nathans, and that's confusing to me, but there are some questions in the chat. I'm happy to respond to them. Like, but what do you think?
See, yeah, here we got one question. How do we quantify individual progress in sustainability? If you want to take a stab at that quickly, Karen, in a minute, I think that sounds great, and that might not be enough time.
No, I meant like typing. Like, should I?
Oh, gotcha. I see.
Yeah. I'm happy to, but I don't know what you want. That's all.
Well, it's a great question. It would be nice to stay on here. I'm not sure if we're supposed to be signing off at 3:45. Colleen, do you have any protocol suggestions for us?
Help, Colleen.
I think we're ending the webinar. So I also, yeah, I think that's Emily's plan. So
okay.
So yeah,
well,
so thanks.
Everybody can feel free who's on this who may have other questions to reach out to us at the Nelson Institute, and we'd be happy to make these connections and try to help answer your questions in even more detail. So thanks to everybody. We appreciate your questions, and have a great rest of your Earth Day. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Appreciated the opportunity.
Yes.